All right. Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. Our fundamental belief at AFN is that change is where opportunity happens. And the best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. And so in our events, we bring forward subject matter expert to help us learn a little bit more about what's going on in the world where we might not have the knowledge that can be helpful in us driving our organizations to the next level. Today, we've got Stephanie King with us, good friend of mine for a long time. She's chief admin and legal officer at Playco. She's been deputy GC at Twitter, general counsel at Nextroll, been at a ton of tech and healthcare companies, and has been outside counsel as well. So she can give us the full flavor of what's going on in the legal world as it relates to our organizations. And Stephanie's here to help us think about what our relationship with legal should be and how do we optimize that for our organizations. Steph, awesome to see you. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Matt. I always enjoy chatting with you and hopefully sharing some wisdom and making legal less scary and more of an ally.
Great. Well, and I think maybe that's a good place to start is like thinking about this idea of alliances within legal. You and I were talking a little bit that legal by its nature is cross-functional. You touch every part of the business. So you could be a network hub within the organization, but sometimes it's shunted off to the side. How do you think about where legal should sit and how it can be a critical ally within the organization?
Yeah, this is something that's really core to how I personally function. And when I counsel teams and new general counsels and business people, because legal interacts with so many parts of the business. So if you are sales driven, they're helping the sales team get contracts reviewed and signed and onboarding new customers. They're also working with finance. They're also working with HR. They're also working with the product teams. They're also working with executives. So they really are a central piece to the company, and the more context they have for the business and how it works and what the levers are, both for success, whether it's financial or gaining new partnerships or now I'm spending time in the regulatory space. So that type of, if you are government, you have government contracts, building those relationships, they're involved in all those places and they can see where the blockages are in many cases, whether it's legal or not, if they are inquisitive. So if your legal team is inquisitive and curious in how they interact with their stakeholders, their internal clients, they're getting information back of how things are functioning and who maybe needs to connect with whom. An example would be at Nextroll, we would see different parts of the business. They were trying to move fast, right? A lot of tech companies in particular want to move quickly and they want to enable small teams to go try new things, which is awesome. But sometimes you have teams trying to solve problems that other teams are also trying to solve, and they don't know that both parties are working on the same issue. And so we found we would actually say, oh, hey, do you know that, Jill's actually working on that issue? Maybe you two should connect. Or we would see where one team is causing a bottleneck for another team, and we try to connect those two teams so that they can work out a solution. And so maybe we're not the solution, but we're just a connector. So that's one way. Another way is process. I love process, good process, not bad process, but it can be a way that legal can partner, not necessarily own, but partner with other teams to help make process easier. For example, for sales related, we often needed our potential customers to sign non-disclosure agreements if we were going to show them things on a future roadmap, for example, that the sales team wanted to pitch. It's like, hey, this is coming. And it was always there's a battle of the paper. Whose NDA are you going to sign? And then that can hold up even having the initial talks for sales which clearly holds up getting a deal closed. So we worked with the team to find out, okay, they're using Salesforce sales is using Salesforce to manage all their paperwork and their calls and track all that. So we actually put together a very fair non-disclosure agreement that we had pre-signed on our end. And we uploaded it into Salesforce so the sales team could just shoot that out to the other party, the potential customer, and just have them sign it. And it was fair; it was not one-sided, and so that sped up their first call. So, an example is just trying to connect those dots and being a process facilitator too. Yeah.
So I want to maybe put a point on good process versus bad process. Like many people will say, "Oh, process, you're just talking about bureaucracy." Process can be a means towards leverage. How do you define good process versus bad process?
Yeah, good process for me means taking time away from having to make low risk decisions so I can spend time on higher risk, higher leverage decisions. And process is good for that kind of thing.
Why do bad processes get put in place?
I think a few reasons. One, people want to do their jobs well, and they feel responsible for their part of whatever the process is. Yep. And so I think as you get bigger, there's a concern of like, oh, I need to see all the things or else I'm not doing my job. And maybe a bad thing happens and I will be blamed for not having done my job. So I need to make sure I'm in the process and I've ticked all the boxes all the time. And when you have multiple teams doing that, then you get a very bulky process right away. I think another thing is we have so many tools nowadays, and so people want to use their tools for whatever the process is. Mm-hmm. And so that can add incredible complexity as well. So one of the things I try to look at for processes, what is really, again, the high risk, there's a one-way door. If you make this decision, you can't back it out. Those are the things I want to spend time on and that I really want us to look at. And then for the low risk stuff, and the NDA is an example, like, yes, you want to have one in place, but does it really need to be super aggressive in one way? Really, is that helping you in the long run or not? That's low risk. We pre-signed it. If the other side will sign it, we don't need to look at it again, right? I don't need to see it. I actually don't want to see it. It's not a good use of anyone's time, and it's not, as my mom used to say, the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. It's like you're putting all this effort into something that's not going to really move the needle for the business or increase risk in the long run. So that's how I look at it. Another thing we talked about was, for many people negotiating deals, indemnification. I'm going to use legal words that everybody's eyes are going to gloss over, but indemnification and limitation of liability are ones that lawyers always talk about and get stuck on. And the business is like, who cares? Can we just move on? And so something we worked on was we worked with our chief revenue officer and our chief financial officer and legal, and we came up with a chart that was, okay, if the deal is this much, here's where we're able to move on the indemnification and the limitation of liability. If the deal is this much, then this. And then it didn't need to go through legal, right? Legal didn't need to, if it was following those guidelines that those three groups had agreed on, then great, let's move it forward. We only spent time on the ones that were outside of those guidelines. And we tried to look at, like, where does our business mostly fall? Like, are there exceptions? Like, hey, this is a very special partner. It's a strategic potential partner. So we're willing as a business decision to do more. So that's where we'd spend our time, which made sense.
Right.
But I didn't want to see all of it.
No. Well, and I mean, I think that you only have so much time, same as everyone else. And if you're spending time on all the little things, that means the big things aren't getting handled or aren't even possible. And I think, we talked about the idea of risk a lot. And I think, one of the challenges that we get between, how people think about legal and how you can actually be enacting things with the business is, let's take sales for an example. Fundamentally, an optimistic pursuit, right? That you can actually get someone to buy something from you. And when you're talking about risk, that feels pessimistic to folks. And so, how do we square the circle on what the ROI essentially is of your legal counsel and how that can be a part of your optimistic pursuit? How do you get inside of the head of these people to help them really rectify?
Yeah. So another example, I think it really depends on your business model and where do your customers see risk? because they also are managing their own risk. And an example here that I had a lot of experience with, again, at Nextroll, which is an ad tech company, is on data, right? On how data is being collected and used through a vendor. And this became even more heightened as regulations changed. And at first, when I got to the company, it was not high on the list of sales. They were like, I don't really care about this privacy stuff. What are you talking about? Very quickly, though, the regulatory landscape changed, and that meant the pressures on our customers changed. So now they cared. So as a lawyer, one of the things I try to find out is what matters to the group that is moving the business forward. And if you're sales driven B2B, or if you're B2B, it's probably sales. For me, I'm now at B2C, so it's engineering and product. What are the concerns for those groups? And then how can legal make it easier for those groups to answer those concerns? So with respect to sales and privacy, we ended up putting legal worked on a trust hub for Nextroll. And on it, it was publicly facing. It explained at a very high level what ad tech was, because a lot of the customers didn't actually understand the technicalities of it. And it wasn't super technical, but it was a visual. And then It was, here's where we are. Here's why we have certain policies we have. Here's what we're doing to be GDPR ready. What is GDPR? We did podcasts actually and posted them so that sales had another tool to overcome objections that their potential customers would have. And they could send people there, which made the company look like it was on the ball, which we were, I'd like to think. But it was useful information for both sales and the customers. So that helped speed up sales. And the big picture there was understanding what the objections or the challenges are for whoever your main customer is within the business, sales, product, whatever, and then find ways to enable them, make it easier for them. Another thing that we do at this company, because I'm now a team of one, we, as many tech companies, had to shrink last year. But while I still had a team and now I still do, I believe in checklists and I believe in visuals to help make the legal point, like the legal point that really is based in business, which may be customer protection, consumer protection, or it may be, yes, there is a regulation we just have to follow, or it's a tax and accounting issue. And even though it's not legal, it's going to impact how you build your thing. So for example, in ads, no, you can't exchange hamburgers for ads you want to sell on the platform. And that's a real story, as it will impact our accounting statements.
Right.
So checklists and things. So we have toolkits that we've built as legal for our product teams so that they know, hey, I want to collect emails. And we were like, okay, great. If you want to collect emails, here are the things you need to do and why you need to do those things. And then we have Notion, so it's up on Notion. So I can direct people there. We did a similar thing for equity, which was a big question. It's, again, in the tech space, equity is a huge thing for employees, and they have a lot of questions. So we partnered with our finance and HR team, and we put together a whole FAQ and how do things work. So when people have questions, HR just directs them there.
Right. Well, okay. So as you mentioned, you're the team of one right now, and General Counsel, general being in the name versus specialized, right? So you're the person you know everything about legal. That's all the company needs, right? How should people be thinking about like what legal resources look like? You got a GC, but when do you need to have expertise that's more specialized than that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think for a lot of companies who are really small, I like to say I do counsel generally. I have some areas where I can go deep because that's what I came up through, but other areas are completely new to me. And my superpower is knowing what I don't know and knowing someone I can call who will know what I don't know, or know someone who knows someone. And then that's how I get the best counsel for whatever the issue is. When you're first deciding, do I need a general counsel or do I need in-house legal? For many companies, they may be fine with not a general counsel, but somebody, if you're sales based and you are very contract heavy, you may want somebody who's a lawyer who can do contracts and can set up process for some of the other things, but you would still need to call outside counsel for very specialized stuff, or you would rely on your main outside counsel to set you up for incorporation and is in your board meetings, you still maintain them, and you just have in-house. Some people may only need a legal operations person to start, actually. It's
Okay.
when you get more complex, you may be a heavily regulated environment, or have really complex partnership deals. There may be or a giant sales team, and you actually do need more, or a complex employee base. So maybe you're international and you're having to manage that you would need, hey, we actually need a general counsel who can deal with all this stuff. But
Right.
that general counsel very unlikely is going to know all the things to be able to solve all your problems, but he or she should be able to get you the right outside counsel that they partner with and manage to answer your questions. So your legal bills may not go down, but they may be more efficient.
Right. Right. Yeah, ROI may be tough to figure out on that. Being the network nerd, I think that two of the things that, as you're thinking about bringing in general counsel inside the company, that maybe are worth testing for or figuring out is, can this person integrate into our network internally for the company? Yeah. And then the second thing, which you just mentioned, was what network of specialist resources do they have access to be able to get there? How would you go about assessing either one of those things when you're thinking about your general counsel?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's really hard when we're in the world of 30-minute Zoom interviews, working remotely for that first piece, which is the cultural fit of the company. I think it's really important that there's an honest conversation with whoever the candidates are and the company of what do they view this role as, and what is the company's view on legal risk. So, for example, early days of Uber, they needed lawyers, but they had a litigator because they weren't trying to assess the rules in advance and follow the rules. They were like, we're going to go into markets and make the market and then deal with the regulators and whoever's mad at us later. So that is a business model. That's the business model they went on. And as a lawyer interviewing with them, you need to know that and know, is that the world I'm comfortable in? And for some people it is. They're litigators or used to dealing in the regulatory space, and they're like, fine, that's great for me. Other people may be more from the product side or the corporate side, are like, ooh, that, that's not using my skill set, and that's not how I operate. That's an extreme example, but that is one. But both parties can't assess it if they don't have information about how the company actually operates. Are you seeing the legal team as a rubber stamp that you just need to have it, or do you see them really as a partner, and therefore they are seated in the organization, reporting to the CEO, they're part of the C-suite, and they're involved in all those discussions, so they have the context and can incorporate that into how they're dealing with risk, assessing risk for the company? Or do you plan on having them, report to the CFO or the COO and be down the staff, which there are different ways to do it, but you're going to get a different result. You're going to have a different relationship with legal. And
what
then
about
the second
for testing?
one is
go ahead.
the network. That one's a little harder. It's harder and easier. I would say, I don't think just because someone has years of practice that they necessarily are well connected. It also will depend on your industry. You can have people who are well connected, but nothing to do with your industry, which may be harder for them to get answers quickly if they don't have that context and that network. You're really looking for someone who's well connected in whatever space you're working in, as well as random stuff like employment or international equity, and so it is. It kind of goes back to old school, like reputation in the space. Have they worked in different industries before, so they have different context for stuff. Even if it's adjacent industries, that might be close enough. But trying to suss out just where their experience is, and also how much they used outside counsel or used their network in their past lives. Because you may have some people who were at very big companies and never talked to outside counsel, and they had to solve everything themselves. And there is a place for those lawyers, for sure. But if you're at like a small startup that needs to be scrappy, it's going to be harder for those folks to get answers quickly for you.
Yeah. Well, and if for folks who think about hiring a general counsel, I think it's really hard to evaluate a GC's skill, right?
Yeah.
Um, how am I going to know you're good at legal stuff? Because that's not my expertise.
Yeah.
But being able to, there's probably some proxies that you can use around it, like experience being one of them. But then, are they actually going to get what you're trying to do within the business? Is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. I think talking to them about how they think through issues and how they approach challenging problems, especially when the business wants to do one thing and it feels like a lot of risk. How do they think through that? And you can tease out their thought process there. Is it just, well, these are the rules and these are the rules, and so you have to follow the rules? Or is it,
Yeah,
well, or is it more of a, hey, let me understand what the business is really trying to accomplish? Like, what's the actual final goal? And then how do we work backwards from there and think about how they can test things maybe before they build a
right,
full suite,
right.
and we can see, is it worth it from a business sense to even do the risky thing? And if it is, then maybe then it's a different risk calculation, right?
Yeah,
So those would be the questions I would ask, because you will get some answers of these are the rules and you have to follow them. And there may be some industries where, like banking, for example, is heavily
yeah,
regulated and you can't like be squishy about the rules. But then there are other
right.
industries where the rules are squishy, consumer protection, like the rules are squishy. So you've got to figure out how do we build the thing we're trying to build, accomplish the thing we're trying to accomplish with consumers' best interests in mind. That is what you're trying to do, and there's a lot of ways to do it. So that would be what I would ask. Questions around for your industry, if there's been a tricky problem, proposing that and seeing what response you get. What is the thought process? They say, hey, I'd go benchmark. I'd like check with what our competitors are doing or other people I know in the space and see how they're thinking about risk. That's something I do a lot, actually, because we are in a space where you're trying to get what is the herd doing, what's the benchmarking, how are other people thinking about these new issues, applying old laws to new issues. So for me, that's a way I would suss it out.
Well, it sounds like that scenario-based interviewing is what you got to do, right? You basically have to get to the story
I think it's
on
part
it,
of it
or
for
else.
sure. Yeah, it is.
Um, how do you know when you got to hire a general counsel? I mean, I know that it can be different for other
Yeah.
things, for all sorts of different businesses, but what questions would I want to ask myself to figure out if I need one?
Yeah. Are you calling your outside counsel all the time for small things that you just need direction on? Would be one. Another would be there's a lot of administrative legal work to get up and running that you just don't have bandwidth for. You can offload that to outside counsel, but it's going to be really expensive. And my question there would be, is it worth offloading, or is it something I should bring in house? Is this going to be a one-time project, or is this something that is part of your business because of how your business operates, that you're going to have to continue it? If you need to continue it, I'd bring it in house. If it's a one-off project, then you can work with your outside counsel to do it.
Yeah.
If you're heavily regulated and you really need someone who's going to be on the ground interpreting those regulations with the product team, that's something that you probably need to bring in a general counsel. You may, if you're really good at getting, I call it as like a stable of outside counsel who are really good at their specific thing, somebody has to manage that too. And if
Right.
as an
Right.
executive, a business executive, you're like, I don't have time, like my time is not best spent dealing with the international employment issues or union, if you have a union, like union trade negotiations or whatever, maybe that's the time where you need to get a general counsel in to manage all of those things and
Yeah.
take on that work so you can focus on building the business and the product and things like that.
Peeking behind the curtain with legal counsel, motivations and rewards. And let's take it individually. Let's think about both inside and outside. What are some of the motivations and rewards of someone who is in the GC, associate GC position within a company? And then we'll go to the outside.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I would say we are all individuals and not a monolith. So you may have some people who are very driven by the financial compensation that is, the cold hard cash. It may depend on their family situation, like with anyone. You also, depending if you have somebody who's at a startup, they may be willing to say, yeah, I'm on the ship with you, like give me equity and I can take a hit on the cash. I think for many of us, it's having a voice and being heard. And so how do you do that? How do you incentivize that? You can pay people a lot, but if they don't feel like they're adding value or that they're valued, then I think you're still going to have a struggle with your counsel. So I'm someone who values that part highly. Like I need to make a certain amount to support my 3 kids and everything else and myself. But other than that, like I really want a seat at the table. And I want to feel I'm adding value and being valued. And so that's the squishier stuff, but it is part of the being included in context, and the relationship. So it's hard to put it into dollars and cents, right? But money does talk too. Yeah. And reporting structure.
Does outside counsel make more than inside? Like what's the generally?
Yeah, generally, yes. I mean, unless you are an inside counsel who hit it big at a, OpenAI or, they get compensated. The super top people get compensated well, but if you're outside counsel at a big firm, you are making way more, I would say, than inside counsel. Yeah, at a big firm.
And how's work life different between the two for legal counsel?
Super interesting question. I think there used to be an assumption that, if you go in-house, you're leading the cushy life. And I think it depends where you go and what the work ethic of the company is. But we are still on call, right, for the CEO or the CFO. But I have way more visibility on what my work life balance will be or what my work is. I have way more control over what I can defer and what I need to do right now. It doesn't mean there's less work. It's just I find I have more of a lot of different things that I have to balance. I have more balls in the air, whereas at a law firm I had bigger projects, but fewer of them, and they were more of the same kind. Here, it's just, 1 minute I'll be dealing with, we're getting insurance for directors and officers. Another moment I'm dealing with a product issue. Another moment I'm dealing with public policy issue. Another moment I'm dealing with an employment issue. So it really is bouncing all over the place. Whereas when I was outside counsel, it was, I'm working on a fundraise for a startup, or I'm working on, helping to prep for a board meeting. And there's still different things, but it's not quite as variable. And they're bigger projects. Yeah.
What about the motivations for outside counsel and the reward they look for?
That's also interesting. I think many people think, they're just going to overbill because it's all billable hours. And so they're going to take as long as they can on whatever the project is. There may be some lawyers who operate that way. I find that most outside counsel want to be valued and add value. But again, going back to they want to make sure they're doing their job and they don't want to get it wrong. And I think as outside counsel, the getting it wrong bar is so much like you have to dot your I's and cross your T's way much more because that's what you're getting paid for versus in-house counsel where you're like 80-20. I got to just good enough and get it out the door so nobody's going to jail. And, it's more than that. But whereas outside counsel, you usually hire outside counsel because you want their expertise. And so they are more likely to spend more time on things. And that's why it's really important to manage them well of, I do not want a memo or I do want a memo. Just send me an email. I want the high level. So, and that's what something your general counsel will know how to communicate or should know how to communicate with outside counsel better to get the most out of your outside counsel. But so on the motivation side, like, yes, they want to get paid. They do want to add value. One thing I find when I was outside counsel, I didn't know what the end of the story was. Okay, I gave advice and I have no idea what happened. And that's why I love being in-house, because I live it. I live what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now the difference in accountability is interesting, right? Because you're like, oh, I told you what to do. I guess I'll maybe find out, maybe I won't.
Yeah. My favorite is this, I can't claim this is my own. Another general counsel told me he never said, I told you so. He would say, remember that time when I failed to convince you not to do the thing or to do the thing?
Well, yeah, and I think that's an
Uh,
interesting point. Is like, hey, you can give as much advice as you want, but like they
yeah.
can decisions can be made outside of what you think is the
And they
right way
will,
to do.
and they will be and should be. I also say, like,
Yeah.
legal shouldn't be your product development team. Like, we shouldn't be developing the product. Yes, I want my voice heard, but you don't want to hand it over and say, well, legal told us to do this, this way. It should be a discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so just maybe last thing as we think about like, when we're working with general counsels, how do we know when they're doing a good job? How can we evaluate them?
It's an excellent question, and it's a tough one. One of the things I find with legal, like finance, if you don't hear about them, they're probably doing an amazing job or no job at all, right? But it's going to be one of those two extremes. But it's hard to prove a negative, like, oh, we didn't get sued because we did the right thing.
Right.
One thing I would look at is, what are the relationships your legal team has throughout the company? How do their partners view them? And it doesn't mean it's like, oh, they get everything through really fast and never flag anything. That's not probably ideal either. But it's more of, oh yeah, we interact with them and we solve problems. So what is the reputation of the legal department throughout the
Right.
company? And even if it's negative, I would ask, why is it negative? Is it something that the legal team is doing, or is it because they don't have context or information, or they're looped in too far at the end? And then I tell my engineers this, like, I don't want to tell you to rip code out. You spent all that time developing it, and
Yeah.
you don't want to rip it out either. So, like, bring me in earlier so we can find a solution earlier and avoid it. So you have to ask, even if your team has a not great reputation, why is that? And it may be the team, but it may also be other factors that can be fixed and make it a really productive relationship.
Great. Any other parting thoughts for us that you'd like to make sure you get across?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I love working in businesses, and I think there are a lot of lawyers who really want to be part of the team and be seen as an ally. And so if you can, and we're people too. So if you can make friends with your lawyer and find out what makes them tick and what they need to do a good job. And yeah, sometimes it's not the right fit, but a lot of times it's just getting to understand each other and the language that you're using, and spending that time will pay off a lot in the long run.
Awesome. Well, thanks a ton, Stephanie. Great conversation.
You're so welcome, Matt. Thanks for having me. Hope it was helpful.